There are fundamental and profound differences between the philosophy of animal welfare and that of animal rights. Animal rights philosophy rests on the recognition of the moral inviolability of the individual, both human and non-human. Just as people of colour do not exist as resources for whites or women for men, so other animals do not exist as resources for human beings. The goal of the animal rights movement is nothing less than the total liberation of non-human animals from human tyranny. So, hello and welcome to another YouTube thing by me. I'm Roger Yates, vegan since 1979, blah blah blah. You have to watch some of the earlier ones if you want the full story now, I suppose. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about Tom Regan. Tom Regan is a pioneer of rights-based animal rights. He wrote The Case for Animal Rights in 1983 and started work on animal rights theory in the 70s, and it culminated in The Case for Animal Rights. And really should be regarded as one of the pioneers of the idea that other animals are rights bearers, and that when we use them, that is a rights violation, which is essentially the position. The quote I've just read is from a 1992 article in an old magazine called The Animal's Agenda, which was published in the United States. And essentially you've got Tom Regan and another author who's now left the movement talking about abolitionist animal rights and putting the case for that versus, if you like, it was called point counterpoint, versus Ingrid Newkirk, who put the anti-purist kind of new welfarist kind of position about baby steps and all that kind of stuff. So I think again we can see the crude difference between welfare and rights in terms of use and treatment. So animal welfarists are talking about regulating the treatment of other animals while they're being used, whereas animal rights is about not using them at all. And Tom Regan is famous for saying that we don't want larger cages, we want empty cages. You know, it's incumbent on us to keep Regan's legacy alive, I believe, not least because the animal movement has been absolutely shameful towards Regan. They marginalised his work when he was alive, and even now not many people know much about it. And so I think it's going to be up to the grassroots to do that important job. And I know that Carolyn Bailey from AR Zone is very keen on keeping Regan's legacy alive and kicking. Okay, so what Regan's getting at essentially with this article is that a movement's ends and its means should be consistent. That if you want a particular end, then your means to get to that end has got to be relevant and consistent with the end. Now, this is why this new growth in Reducetarianism is very dangerous and should be rejected by vegans. The growth of the Reducetarian movement is a bit puzzling within the animal rights movement. They are trotting around the world, going to conference after conference, telling vegans not to be vegan. Now, why are they being invited to vegan conferences in the first place is a bit of a mystery. Now, some of them, like Leonard, for example, would claim that veganism is their end game, but a lot of these people, like Brian Capeman and Matt Ball, they don't even seem to have veganism as their end game. I mean, Ball's new organisation is called One Step for Animals. It's not even called First Step for Animals, it's called One Step for Animals, which essentially says that eat large animals like pigs and cows rather than small animals like chickens. So we come back to this idea, are the means that we are talking about consistent with our ends? If our end is to abolish animal use, is it consistent to actually suggest that we continue to use them, that we maybe make adjustments in terms of our use, but we continue to use them anyway? Now, one thing that the Reducetarian movement doesn't like, and they reject this out of hand, is when you make human rights analogies. And I think the reason for that is because it kind of starkly reveals that their position is absolutely appalling and disgusting. You know, they might, for example, support Meat-Free Monday. If you were to put that into a human rights context, then it would be appalling. Leonard talks about that someone should be regarded as a vegan even if they still eat fishes or eggs, for example. Now again, putting that into a human context, we would be absolutely appalled. You know, the person trots down to the brothel and sexually assaults trafficked persons there only once a month. Well, we're not going to regard them as a feminist, we're not going to regard them as a human rights advocate, are we? And so there's a fundamental problem here. There's a mismatch between where we're saying we're going to the steps that we suggest to get there. And in fact, offering steps itself is a problem. And in some, I made a point on Facebook recently about agency. Now, I think animal rights advocates have a lot more optimism about human beings in terms of agency. In other words, we have, you know, we adhere to the idea that if we propound a moral theory and then people have got the wherewithal to assess the theory and then to move towards it, then our job essentially is to carry on propounding the theory, and then they will move forward and take the steps required as they wish. We can't control that bit. What the Reducetarians seem to suggest, in fact some of them do suggest, is the fact that we need to have baby steps, but we have to lay them out. So as it were, first do this and then do this and then. Now, you know, from an animal rights point of view, that's not needed. You know, all we need to do is make the case for vegan animal rights, and if people are convinced by it, they'll move towards our position. We get that on the streets of Dublin all the time. People saying, you know, I can see the strength of your argument and I'm moving towards you as best as I can. You know, and we don't have to, you know, suggest their steps. Of course, if they ask you for advice, that's different. You give advice. But, you know, we don't have to say, okay, well, you know, are you thinking of doing this? You know, because that essentially would be promoting animal use. So even if you accept that people would move towards veganism incrementally, as most people do, not all people, but most people do that, even if you accept that, you know, you don't have to promote that, and you just almost like have to acknowledge it more than promote it, and just encourage people to be as vegan as possible, which is again why the idea of vegetarian first has kind of gone out the window nowadays, which is really good. People don't say go vegetarian first anymore like they used to. They say be as vegan as possible, which is a good way of doing it. So we need to sort a few things out, and one of the things that we need to do is figure out, are we rights, are we welfare, are we Reducetarians, are we vegans, do we adhere to the original meaning of veganism, or are we going to start buying into these new ideas that vegans can eat other animals, which obviously from my point of view is just not veganism. You know, I hope you'll reject that, and I hope that there's going to be a growing movement towards making sure that these Reducetarian people, these people who are actually encouraging people to eat other animals, they shouldn't be invited to vegan conferences. Why are they being invited to vegan conferences? Something that we ought to sort out as a movement, I think. Okay, that's enough for now. I'll catch you next time. See you.